Dr. Wayne Frederick is the president of Howard University, one of the nation's leading historically black universities. We were just discussing this with Representative Alma Adams. As president, he's devoted himself to modernizing university facilities, expanding academic offerings. He's done so much with Howard University. I am a neighbor there, and I appreciate all the investment he is making in our young people in this country. Just last year, he was named Nonprofit Leader of the Year by Washington Business Journal. Dr. Frederick, it's a pleasure to have you on today. Let me just ask you, I was talking to Alma Adams today, and she was kind of looking, talking about HBCU STEAM days, looking at, the emphasis on science, technology, the arts, broadly within HBCUs, finding partnerships with leading employers. All of that is really about trying to knock down the walls of systemic racism, which have been part of this country for a long time. I'd just like to get a snapshot from you as you look at this agenda. How is it going? Are you optimistic? What are the walls in the way of your graduates today?
Yeah, I'm certainly optimistic. A few years ago when I took over as president, one of the first things I did was go out to Silicon Valley and really make the pitch that, listen, if you think my students have any type of shortcomings in any areas, and at that time, one of the things that was often said was that they learned to code too late, et cetera. So we cut a deal with Google, did Howard West. We took our students there and gave them some of teaching. And I think we got a very, very different feedback from them. I think they saw the talent rise and they saw what our students were able to do. And also the data suggests that we do need our historically black colleges and universities like Howard. Howard still sends more African Americans to medical school than any other single institution in this country. And we've graduated more black physicians than any single institution. So I do think the agenda is there. I think we're fulfilling the agenda. But I am worried about the significant weight, as it were, on HBCUs to continue to produce that large percentage of black graduates in the country without the resources. I think that is a gap that has to be closed.
Is Vice President Kamala Harris, is one of your graduates, is she a good alum?
She's an excellent alum. Long before I would say the nation got to know her, she was blocking and tackling. And I'll give you a few examples. She was Attorney General just yesterday as we had our funeral services for our other alum, Vernon Jordan. She visited briefly. And one of the things that she reminded me was that she was called by Vernon Jordan to serve on the presidential search committee that selected me. She was Attorney General of California at the time. That involved her having to fly back and forth to the East Coast to do that. When she came as a senator, she quickly set up an experience for students on the Hill. Started with her office and quickly expanded to offices on both sides of the aisle. So well behind the scenes, she has been here engaging and interacting with students. She was my commencement speaker in 2017. She's been thrust into the limelight and has told her Howard story. But it's not one that she has just started telling. It's one that she has actually been living for quite some time.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I had no idea how you were going to answer. I didn't know. Maybe she was a bad alum. Maybe she's never. So it's kind of good to hear that. But I think one of the other things, I think a lot of people, when we're talking about education today and you're running a large institution, I think people forget you have real estate you've got to manage. You have dorms that have to be occupied. That during this last year, the whole economic equation of how an educational institution manages itself has been, flipped on its back. And I guess my question is, I see a lot of colleges and universities, particularly a lot of smaller liberal arts colleges, really struggling, some going under right now. How are the HBCUs doing? Do they have the resources they need during this time of high stress to come out the other side?
Yeah, and I think some of the HBCUs, obviously, as you can imagine, are going to be hurting just like those institutions you mentioned. What I can tell you is at Howard, we've been doing okay. And that's because one of the things that you mentioned, which is critical, income coming in from housing in particular, that was something that we had turned over to third-party players. I think one of the issues with our universities is, you're right, they're very complicated. It's like being the mayor of a small town. But one of the things that we recognize, I think, in higher ed is there's some things that we're not going to do as well as some third-party vendors. And one of those things that you sometimes have to look at is housing. Although it represents a revenue stream in a situation like this, it can really take you under. And there's several other aspects of what happens at a university that we need to be careful we're not getting into businesses that we probably shouldn't be into, as opposed to really focusing on what we do best, and that's education.
You know, one of the other dimensions out there that I think we've been discussing a lot here at The Hill is how COVID, both the infection and the death rates, but also the impact on people's jobs, economic circumstances, has hit the Black and brown community so much more substantially in ways, greater percentages than the white community. And I guess, you know, I would ask at this time whether or not, as you look at what needs to be moved by way of education, because one of the things I'm worried right now about is everyone I see on vaccination rates is saying that a lot of Black and brown community are not getting vaccinated because of their own hesitancy, not because of provision and supply, but because of their hesitancy. And I'm wondering what role you and the college can do in helping to get people in that equation.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, Howard has stood up a vaccination center. And I have to be honest with you, I'm not sure that we are really accurately defining how much of this is vaccine hesitancy versus the supply chain logistics that you were mentioning. And I do think that requires some deeper analytics. Howard is a trusted messenger in the community. And what we're seeing is an overwhelming desire for African Americans to have the vaccine. Yes, there is some resistance and hesitancy, but as you vaccinate more people in the community and they can go back and tell their story, people can see them thriving, people can see the CDC recommendations about what's happening. And the other thing that has to happen is we've moved from having clinical trials to now vaccinating people in the public. We have to start pushing out information from CDC that says not just how many people have been vaccinated, but how many people are having reactions, how many people appear to be developing some significant immunity, how many people who have been vaccinated have gotten infected. All of those things will help the public. So the information needs to be pushed, but you need to use trusted messengers. Our vaccination center has been packed and people are coming in significant numbers. The other thing that I would mention is while we stood up a vaccination center, and in DC, the Pfizer vaccine and Moderna vaccines are available, we went ahead and participated in a phase 3 clinical trial with Novavax on their vaccine. And I was a bit concerned to your earlier point as to whether we would even get people to sign up, because some of those people may get a placebo. And they clearly wanted us to participate to see if we can encourage minorities to participate in a clinical trial. And we were able to hit our enrollment numbers. Again, I think testament to the fact that we are seen as a trusted messenger.
Wayne, I don't know if I'm going to get this question out right. It's sort of part comment, part question, but I talked to Lonnie Bunch the other day. Lonnie is, of course, for the folks, the 13th secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. He built and put together the National Museum of African American History and Culture. But I talked to him and I said, if you're the steward of American culture and history, and there's been a problem in the storytelling where a lot of people did not know about the Tulsa Massacre, they do not know about many of the black heroes in this country or, legacy, or they do not know, just the whole dimension of American history that just sort of there's an amnesia that's been built into the system. And I went over to Howard one day, and your classes are so rich. They're so different than you would find in excuse how I'm putting this, but a sort of a mainstream white-dominated institution that has a very different. I'm just wondering whether through osmosis or arbitrage or something, how do you think we need to kind of broaden our aperture about what our American history and culture is, where the strengths that you have in Howard become more part of the system? I know it's sort of an odd question, but I sort of feel like, I missed a lot when I grew up, and I'm just wondering how we fix that.
It's not an odd question. I think it's a great question, actually, and it goes to the fabric of who we are as a country and how we really develop greater tolerance and greater integration and interaction. And the key, listening to some of your prior segment, the key part of the human condition is interaction. It's not isolation. And all of these things that have been, where people have been isolated from the facts, from the history, really disrupt the natural, I would say, essence of the human condition. And so what we must do, I think, is to try to put that out. So one of the things that Howard is doing with the National Equity Ed Lab is we have actually been teaching courses, college courses, to public schools around the country. So we started with the New York public school system. We had 100 students, and obviously in a virtual environment that facilitated it. We had one of our professors, Dr. Mohammed, teach a class on social justice. Those students flocked to that class. We are now teaching this semester. Dr. Burke is teaching a class in primarily for students in Flint, Michigan on climate change. So to your point, and obviously, as you can imagine, as you've obviously benefited from, it has a Howard flavor on it. So there's a lot of focus on what happens in minority communities, et cetera. And I think that there's a way for us to do that in our public system. It doesn't just have to be Howard-centric, but I think we have to be honest about looking at the curriculum. And that goes along the spectrum. I just want to underscore for you. I had a Jewish CFO, and every time he would take off on one of the holidays, I'd be concerned as to whether or not the other team really understood. And one day I asked him to come in and basically explain what the Jewish holiday was about, et cetera. And he just lit up. Unfortunately, he passed suddenly in February, but that day was a day that everybody, I think, still remembers. He bought apples in, had to be dipped in honey. He explained the holiday. And that type of tolerance throughout all of our systems, not just in school, but in our institutions, I think is something that we all should be working towards.
Well, Dr. Wayne Frederick, president of Howard University here in Washington, D.C., thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you'll be back. I love this conversation.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.